Welcome back to the Healing Trauma Group. My name is Felicia Housden. I'm the Prevention and Advocate Coordinator for Choices. I'm glad that you're back with me for another session of the Healing Trauma Group. Session 3 will be on the process of trauma and self-care. We talked a little bit about trauma in sessions 1 and 2. We defined trauma. Trauma results from an experience that overwhelms our normal coping mechanisms. The chart that we're going to be going over in this slide is the process of trauma. And this chart helps us see how the events in our lives affect our behaviors and our bodies. It reminds us of the relationships between our thinking, our feeling, our behavior, and our physical and emotional health. So the process of trauma. First thing is the traumatic event. And like I said, this event will overwhelm our normal coping mechanisms. Then our response to trauma comes. And that is the fight, flight, or freeze response. This can create altered states of consciousness. It creates the body sensations that we feel. We can feel the adrenaline dump into our bloodstream, our heart rate increase, we can get sweaty. Those are the body sensations. Some tingling in our hands and our feet perhaps. And this also can create numbing, a hypervigilance, hyperarousal, and it can also create a complete body collapse. The next thing that happens is the sensitized nervous system and changes in the brain-body connection. These are really big words, but defined it is that it changes the neural pathways of the brain and creates nervous system changes between the brain and the body. And it changes its response to trauma to the place where you will respond in the same way, same habitual pattern the next time you go through this trauma response. Then the psychological and physical distress happens. That's current stressors, reminders of the trauma like triggers, which is anything that you see, taste, touch, smell that reminds you of the trauma. There's sensations. We can have images of the trauma. There's behavior changes in us because we are hypervigilant, thinking that the trauma is right around the corner. It affects our emotions and our memory. And then it leads to emotional and or physical responses, which break off into 4 ways of coping. And it doesn't have to just be one. It can be all 4 of these, or it can be 3, or it can be 2, any mixture. And the first one is retreat, which is isolation, dissociation, depression, and anxiety. And dissociation, I think isolation, depression, and anxiety are easy to define, but dissociation is a little different. Dissociation is a split between the mind and the body. It can be experienced as physical or psychological numbing. It can feel like losing time or leaving the body, where you're almost above yourself watching as if you were in a movie. The next one is harmful behavior to self. That's substance use disorders, eating disorders, self-harm, suicidal actions. The next one is harmful behavior to others. You're projecting your feelings onto others through aggression, violence, rages, and threats. And then the last one is physical health issues, which can include lung disease, heart disease, autoimmune disorders, and obesity. Our body works really, really hard to maintain a balance, which is scientifically called homeostasis. When we stay in the process of trauma continually, and those hormones of cortisol, adrenaline, are continually hitting our bloodstream, it creates a space where homeostasis or balance can't be maintained. And the cells rely on that to be able to function properly. And when we're in this state, it erodes the ability to have cells function properly. It lowers our immune system to where we're predisposed to have invaders in the cell. There are 3 physical and psychological responses to trauma. We touched on them a little bit in the last slide. The first one is you flee. You run. You assess the situation. There's no safety, and the only way that you can have that safety is to run. So all the adrenaline goes to running. The next one is fight. So you are ready to combat whatever's coming your way. You feel cornered and you're going to fight your way out. And that adrenaline will go to that space to affect the fight. And then the last one is the overwhelming of the trauma, the adrenaline dump, and it's too much, and you freeze. It's complete body collapse. Trauma changes a person's brain chemistry and how the brain functions. Stress can set off a series of physical changes that alter the structure and the functioning of the brain for it to cope with a dangerous world. And one of the metaphors that I use with my ladies in-house in the Healing Trauma group is, you're driving your car, it's a sunny day, and the trauma represents mud being thrown on your windshield. And you're frantically using your windshield wipers to wipe off the mud to be able to see. And in complex trauma, that mud gets thrown over and over and over and over again on the windshield to when you can't see anything, but you're using your windshield wipers. So it alters the functioning of the brain for it to cope with a dangerous world. Our experiences cause pathways to develop in the brain. One way to think about this is like a pathway in the snow. Once there's a path in the snow, it is easier to move forward if you keep your skis in the path. So it's similar to the neurons in our brain. The same is true for our brains. When there is a traumatic experience, particularly one that occurs more than once, a pathway is made in the brain. Then when we have a similar experience, a trigger that reminds us of this event, we react the same way because of the existing pathway. What is a trigger? When we think about the word trigger, I think all of us kind of go to the trigger of a gun. It's pulling something and making something happen very rapidly. It can be a switch on some kind of machinery. It's a trigger. And I think that that word is really, really appropriate as a metaphor for trauma. A trigger is an incident in our lives that reminds us of a past traumatic event or events. It sets off a physical and emotional reaction in a person. Examples may be a sound, another person that might look really close to the person that created the trauma. It can be a place, a smell, a behavior, or almost anything that reminds us of abusive experiences or other trauma in our past. What is PTSD? And PTSD is an acronym for post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD for short, is a stress and trauma-related disorder that can be simple or complex. The symptoms of PTSD are as follows. Re-experiencing an event. This may occur as disturbing sleep, distressing dreams, nightmares, intrusive memories, flashbacks, reliving the event, and viewing the world as unsafe. Numbing and avoiding. This may occur as not feeling anything physically or emotionally and avoiding any thoughts, feelings, people, places, or reminders of the traumatic event. Changes in mood and thoughts. This may result in low self-esteem, neglect of health, dissociation, and we define dissociation as a brain-body disconnect. Also, changes in mood and thoughts, the ability to remember events or feelings, but not both. Memory loss for certain events, loss of faith and hope, mistrust in others, and isolation and disconnection. And hyperarousal. This may involve intense emotions, difficulty sleeping, panic and anxiousness, self-harm, risky behaviors, irritability, anger, and difficulty concentrating. And post-traumatic stress disorder comes in simple trauma and complex trauma. And we're going to define those. So simple trauma is a singular, often short traumatic incident. And like the pictures show, it can be car accidents, house fires, earthquakes, hurricanes, cyclones, death of a loved one. Complex trauma and PTSD is exposure to multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive interpersonal nature. So they're very personal boundary violations, and the wide range long-term effects of this exposure. Examples are child abuse and neglect, community violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, civil unrest, war trauma, and genocide. And this has a tendency, I put a mirror there, shattered, it has a tendency to fragment the person. We've talked about the process of trauma. We talked about the brain and body connection, how trauma changes the brain and the neural pathways. We've talked about and defined post-traumatic stress disorder, the symptoms of it, and that it comes in simple and complex trauma. So now we're going to discuss ways of coping with trauma. What does it mean to feel grounded or centered? It is a way to detach or disconnect from negative feelings. It is a way to move from a focus on painful internal feelings to a focus on the outside world, which brings us to the present moment. It is a technique to help a person who's dissociating or having a flashback come back into current realities and feelings. It is important to create new brain pathways by doing grounding and self-soothing activities. I'm going to give you some examples. There's a thing now that's called grounding. It's based on the premise that the Earth has a natural magnetic field that our body responds to, and that can create health and peace. And so going outside in bare feet and standing on the ground, or even sitting with your bottom on the ground, is a great way to become present, and it actually sends some feel-good vibrations to your body. The second one is journaling. I'm a big journaler myself, and it's the pen to paper, the thinking that brings you to the present moment while you are doing the writing. And it can be any journal. It can be your thoughts, your daily activities. It can be a gratitude journal where you write down what you're thankful for. But just the pen to paper, mind to pen connection creates a presence, and it brings you into your body. Now the third is, there's a new rage of adult coloring books, and it creates a meditative space while you're coloring that brings presence. It's kind of similar to the journaling. The coloring utensil to the paper, but it creates a in your body feeling and a presence into the present moment. And then yoga. If I had been told probably 5 years ago that I would be doing Kundalini yoga, I probably would have said you're crazy. But there is something to yoga. It actually brings yourself into your body and it keeps you present because you're holding poses. So it is a great tool for grounding. And then meditation. And I'm a meditator too. And if somebody would have told me 5 years ago that I would be comfortable in a meditative space, I'd have said you're crazy. But there is something to these two. And I'm not trying to force those. I just, they bring peace. They bring you to the present moment. And the meditation helps you find a silent space within yourself that is safe. And that's what grounding and self-soothing activities are all about, is to bring you to the present moment, bring you back into your body, and create a safe space. We're going to define self-care. Self-care is the practice of taking action to preserve or improve one's own health and quality of life. And in self-care, it's important to take time to make daily self-care goals, long-term self-care goals, and if you could do anything for yourself, self-care goals. And when I think of self-care in my own personal journey of healing trauma in my own life, self-care is crucial. In certain traumas, it disconnects you from self, where you don't feel like you matter, your thoughts don't matter, your feelings don't matter. So coming back to a place of self-care is crucial. Our society deems to think that self-care is narcissistic and selfish, and it is not. Self-care is honoring your needs, your wants, your talents, your dreams, your body, your mind, your spirit, all of that. So self-care is really, really crucial in healing trauma. We can't talk about self-care without talking about boundaries. External boundaries and internal boundaries. Developing boundaries is essential when a person has been abused. It is a boundary violation. Their physical and sexual and emotional boundaries have not been respected. Once this has happened, it is often difficult to maintain their boundaries with others going forward in life. It is empowering to set and regulate your own boundaries. Our personal boundaries are influenced by our instincts, which is our gut feeling, our experience with others, and our upbringings. It is best to determine your own boundaries based on your own internal compass, not on your reaction to external things or people. Communicating clearly what our limits are with strangers, family members, and our partners and friends is an important life skill. And it's so important for somebody who's healing from trauma, where the trauma has been boundary violations of abuse, physical, emotional, sexual. It's empowering to hear yourself state the boundary. It's empowering to hear yourself and watch yourself enforce boundaries. I'd like to think of boundaries as a zipper, a tent zipper. Most tents have a zipper on the outside and the inside, but I want you to think of boundaries as the inside zipper with no outside zipper. And you are the person that allows people, places, things, emotions in and out, and you have full control of the zipper. And we are at the end of session 3. Thank you for attending our session. And to recap what we learned about the process of trauma. We learned about PTSD, simple and complex traumas. We learned boundaries. We learned how the body and brain connection affects how we deal with trauma for the rest of our lives, that we can have neural pathways change in our brain, that we react to trauma over and over in the same way. We learned about boundaries and how important they are, and how important it is to have self-care to promote healing. I appreciate your time with me. The next session that we will have is session 4A, and that is the ACE questionnaire and resilience. And I will see you next week. The next slide is the grounding activity. It is on Foursquare breathing, which is also called Calm Heart meditation in Kundalini Yoga. Hope you enjoy the grounding activity, and I will see you next week.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here with us virtually with the current state of the world. I don't know about you, but I find myself getting lost in thoughts about the future, what that could look like. But for now, I'd like to bring us into the present moment with a simple breathing exercise. Now I say simple, but for an involuntary action, it is easy to forget. So the exercise we're going to do today is called Foursquare breathing. I call it box breathing, and it is in my personal toolbox for a quick, easy to remember, calming and grounding exercise. We're going to also show you how that pairs with the Calm Heart meditation and yoga. From personal experience, it works like a charm. All you need to do is remember to breathe. All right, imagine a square box. On the left side, you'll breathe in for 5 seconds. Across the top, you hold your breath in for 5 seconds. On the right side, you will breathe out for 5 seconds. And across the bottom, you're going to hold your breath out for 5 seconds. So the key here is to inhale slowly and deeply through both of your nostrils, and then suspend the breath in and raise the chest. Retain it as long as possible. We're going to do 5 seconds, so please don't pass out. And then exhale smoothly and gradually and completely. And then lock the breath out when it's totally out. And just try to be consciously aware of the flow of your breath. So it's going to look a little something like this. So breathe in for 5. We're going to hold for 5 seconds. We're going to slowly exhale, very controlled, out for 5 seconds. And then we're going to hold the breath out. So it's going to look something like that. Now, if you'd like to connect your body, breath, and heart a little more, you may want to try this next yoga position, and it's called the yoga. And I know most of us are in chairs, but if you can, get in the easy pose as shown, but if not, just sit up straight in your chair. This will also allow you to get a nice deep breath. All right, place the left hand on the center of your chest at the heart center, and with your palm flat against the chest and the fingers parallel to the ground, pointing to the right. Now with your next hand, touch your thumb to your index finger and allow your elbow to be relaxed and perpendicular to the floor. All right, so it's going to look something like this. Now if you'd like, you can close your eyes or let your eyes softly gaze straight ahead, and just take a moment here and connect with your body, mind, heart, and soul. And we're going to breathe. So just be present with your breath and the rising and falling of your chest. All right, are we ready? Let's begin. Here we go, ready? We're going to breathe in for 5 seconds and 3, 2, 1. And hold your breath for 5 seconds. Exhale slowly, very controlled. So slowly